This year's theme of the Holocaust Memorial event is ordinary people. On the 15th of December 2022, the House of Commons stood and held a minute of silence led by the Speaker to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the first public announcement by the British government of the Nazis' attempt to murder Europe's Jewish population. On that date, in 1942, the then Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, told a hushed House of Commons that reliable reports had confirmed Hitler's intention to exterminate the Jewish people in Europe. We read that members of the House of Commons stood in silence, quote, as a protest against this disgusting barbarism. So as we remember the genocides that have occurred since, and the horrific war crimes still taking place in Ukraine today, may we also stand in silence and remind ourselves that it is our collective duty as ordinary people to stand against prejudice and hatred today. So may we have a minute's silence, please.
My name is Gracie. I'm a member of Northumberland Youth Cabinet, and I am joined by Abby, Daniel and Rosie, who are also members of Youth Cabinet or the UK Youth Parliament. Today we'll be hosting today's event.
Holocaust Memorial Day was created on 27th of January 2000 when representatives from 46 governments around the world met in Stockholm to discuss Holocaust education, remembrance and research. At the end of this meeting, all attendees signed a declaration committing to preserving the memory of those murdered in the Holocaust. This became a declaration statement of commitment which is still used as the basis for HMD activities today.
Today we remember the millions of people murdered during the Holocaust, under Nazi persecution and in the genocides which followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Our theme this year highlights the ordinary people who let genocide happen, the ordinary people who actively perpetrated genocide, and the ordinary people who were persecuted.
Each year will be a memorial candle for this event. This is one of 70 specially designed candles commissioned in 2015 to mark the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This candle is a constant reminder. We would like to ask you to take a moment to reflect on what it represents. We now invite Rabbi Lipsey to light the candle. Can I now ask Rabbi Lipsey to reflect on the theme of ordinary people?
Thank you very much. So as you've heard, Holocaust Memorial Day honours the memories of the victims of the Holocaust together with those of the Armenian genocide and the genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and of course we really must think about current events and people that are suffering today. The genocide of the Jews of Europe, known simply as the Holocaust, stands apart for its sheer scale. 6 million Jews were murdered. Over half of the pre-war Jewish population of Europe was exterminated by the Germans and their allies. The persecution of the other, whether Jew, Muslim or Tutsi, Roma, clergy or homosexuals, has devoured countless victims in the last century. The excuse for their murder was their religion or their skin colour, their ethnicity, their race, their orientation. Let's not forget the many millions who were forced to flee, to leave their families, their homes and possessions behind. They journeyed on foot, by horse and cart, by train, today by ridiculously small and dangerous boats, by any means they can to escape with their lives. So what's the Jewish message of Holocaust Memorial Day? Well, in the words of the late Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks, Judaism gave two majestic ideas, their greatest religious expression: memory and hope. Memory is our living connection to those who came before us. Hope is what we hand on to the generations yet to come. For when we remember, we do so for the future, the place where, if we are faithful to it, the past never dies. So I'd like to share a story with you, a story of memory and of hope. It's over 30 years since the terrible events in Bosnia dominated the news. Some 30,000 Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, are estimated to have been killed in the last genocide to take place on mainland Europe. The world trembled as the bombs fell on Sarajevo. But it wasn't the first time in modern history that Sarajevo had been under attack. In spring 1941, Yugoslavia was invaded by German forces and overrun. Sarajevo suffered for 4 years at the hands of Nazi oppression and tyranny. There was a Jew in Sarajevo called Josef Kaviljo. His home was bombed, so he and his family had to escape to the hills that surround the city. Josef wanted to take his family out of Nazi reach, obviously, and so he returned to the city alone to try and arrange papers and an escape route. Zainab and Mustafa Hardaga live across a street from the newly established Gestapo headquarters. The Hardagas are devout Muslims. The Kaviljos were religious Jews. Yet the Kaviljos and the Hardagas were firm friends. In fact, they were business partners. And despite the obvious danger to themselves, they insisted that Yosef shelter with them. They greeted him with the words, "Yosef, you're our brother, and your children are like our children. Feel at home, and whatever we own is yours." Well, eventually, Yosef managed to escape together with his family, and they settled in Jerusalem. For their incredible bravery, the Hardagas were the first Muslims to be recognized as righteous among the nations, or the official title that Israel bestows on non-Jews who took extraordinary risks to save Jews during the Holocaust. But now fast forward over 50 years to where we started, and the siege of Sarajevo in 1993. Mustafa Hardaga has died, and his wife Zaneba is an ailing 76. She still lives in Sarajevo with the daughter Sarah, and once again their home is under siege. The bombs rain down, and eventually their apartment takes a direct hit. Sarah, her husband, and young daughter are forced to live in the ruins of the house for 6 months. And one family in Israel is demanding that something must be done. The Kaviljos see what is happening in Bosnia, and they see a chance to repay the debt that they feel they owe Zainab Hardaga and her family. They enlist the help of Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust Memorial Authority, to lobby the government for support. And with the help of the then Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, messages are passed to the tiny besieged community in Sarajevo. The community risk their own lives searching for the family, and eventually they discover them hiding in the cellar of their own home. They provide urgently needed medicine that has been smuggled in for Zainab, and 30 years ago this week, on February the 5th, 1993, Zainab, Sarah and their family escaped to Croatia in a refugee convoy organised by the Jewish aid agencies. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they all end up moving to Israel, and it was Yosef's daughter Tova who greeted them on the runway of Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. So on the one hand, this is an amazing story of two incredible families. On the other, it's an amazing story of two very ordinary families, ordinary people who did extraordinary things. I'd like to finish by reflecting once again on the words of Chief Rabbi Sacks, that memorializing the past gives hope to the future. In the world of ideas where philosophers such as Rabbi Sacks spend their time, his words are undoubtedly true. But in the real world, the ordinary world, if you will, that you and I inhabit, we can do and must do much more than memorialize and hope. We say that actions speak louder than words in our own ordinary lives, through our own ordinary actions and interactions. we can make the world a better place. We can do small acts of goodness and kindness for people that are less fortunate than ourselves. We can be active partners in building a world where there is no place for tyranny and oppression, for murder and genocide. We can open the eyes of the world, and indeed our own eyes, to celebrate how wonderful ordinary can be when done properly, when in fact the ordinary becomes extraordinary, because we are all ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. May God bless you and empower you so that you become a blessing for everyone with whom you come into contact. Thank you very much.
The experience of Holocaust and genocide survivors give us a unique insight into the lives of those who have endured persecution. We will now hear a number of life stories. We will also hear a poem read by Deanna Van de Velde, Vice Chair of the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education.
The Holocaust was the attempt by the Nazis and their collaborators to murder every Jew in Europe. From the time they assumed power in Germany in 1933, the Nazis used propaganda, persecution, and legislation to deny German Jews their human rights and freedoms. They used centuries of anti-Semitism as their foundation. By the end of the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children had been murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, in concentration camps, and extermination camps.
When I was 5 years old, I was at a little school in Amsterdam. It was 1944. It was Nazi-occupied Amsterdam. 2 young men walked in, and one of them said, "Is Martin Stern here?" And the teacher answered, "No, he hasn't come in today." So I put my hand up. And as these 2 young men were leading me out of the back of that little hall, I looked around, and I'll never forget the ashen face of the teacher. My sister and I ended up in a prison camp in the Netherlands, high barbed wire fence, wooden watchtowers, and I watched the people who were loading the other prisoners in. There were a few railwaymen, a few soldiers. I could see their faces, and the faces are no particular emotions. They were just doing a job. And I think even at the age of 5, I was wondering how such an ordinary-looking bunch of men could do that. We were actually taken from there in a passenger train, would you believe it, but then pretty quickly at a station transferred to a cattle truck. And no room to sit. We were wedged standing against each other. Men, women, children, old people. No food, no drink. Towards the end of the journey, I was asking the adults around me why an older man next to me was sleeping with his eyes wide open. I'd never seen a corpse. Eventually, it was announced that children had to board the next train. On the day of our arrival, we were taken from amongst the other children by a Dutch woman prisoner who wanted to look after some children. She decided she could not put us on that train without coming with us to her death. I can remember going with her and my, by now 2-year-old baby sister in her arms to the children's dormitory, which was the assembly place. And it was crowded with children, and a man with a clipboard came in, read out names, those children followed. And gradually the dormitory emptied until the 3 of us were left. The train had left. That train went to Auschwitz.
2023 is the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the genocide in Darfur, a region in West Sudan. Under the cover of a civil war that had broken out in the region, the Sudanese government armed Arab militia groups called the Janjaweed, devils on horseback, to attack black African people in Darfur. These Janjaweed raids have caused a humanitarian catastrophe in Darfur. Thousands of villages have been destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people murdered, and millions forced to flee their homes.
My family also, they are suffering because the government targeting our tribe for. If you are for, I have my brothers, they graduate and they didn't give them a chance to work because he is from tribe. They redundant my dad from his job because he is a four, and we find it's very hard to live, but we suffer a lot. Janjaweed, this is like a nomad people in Darfur. They come and kill the people randomly and take their stuff, and everything is valuable. They take all the lands. The war is start in 2003. We decide with our families to make like a group to help these people to prevent themselves from attack of Arabic Janjaweed. But we didn't, because all the Janjaweed, because the government, they supporting them, funding them, and gives them cars, weapons, and everything. When Janjaweed attacks the village, they, as a families, like your grandfather, grandmother, come, your aunties, your niece, all of them sit in one village. And that time, my family in Zalinja and my Jabal Marra, all of them, they move from that area because the Janjaweed, they come and attack them and take their everything or valuable things. After this war is started, I lost like 150 persons. All of them buried in one grave. Until now, genocide is continuing in Khartoum, in everywhere in Sudan. In our country, we don't feel safe in Darfur. If you want to go out of your house, you don't know if you come back or you die. Every day we hear about someone killed by the military of Sudan, the government of Umar al-Bashir and Janjaweed. Last time I saw my family is 2009. I not feel safe for my family back home because the government or Janjaweed, they're targeting us from everywhere.
This poem is called The Tablecloth. It's written by a lady called Lottie Kramer, who came to the UK on the kinder transport. And I looked her up today. She's going to be 100 this year and worked in a laundry. So I thought it was very appropriate. Part of this year's theme is ordinary people, but also ordinary objects. So let's have a look at the poem. A tablecloth, a white, coarse linen weave, a dead thing. So it seems. Its threads are greatly rent in places, as in dreams, when falling into pits, we wake in unbelief. So phrase this weft. My father's mother made the cloth in quiet days. What patient thoughts she wove around this loom. Narrow village ways, important hours, underlined her shade. Now, when I touch the fragile web and spread it with our wine and bread and watch it slowly die, I grieve not for its breach, for the broken peace, the ruthlessness, our dread.
Ordinary people were involved in all aspects of the Holocaust, Nazi persecution of other groups, and the genocides that took place in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Ordinary people were perpetrators, bystanders, rescuers, witnesses, and ordinary people were victims. The theme prompts us to consider how ordinary people such as ourselves can perhaps play a bigger part than we might imagine in challenging prejudice today.
Ordinary people were railway workers during the Holocaust. Dr. Martin Stone, MBE, Holocaust survivor. And as a 5-year-old, I could stand at the edge of the clearing where the trains were being loaded. People like sardines in those wooden trucks, and the people loading them in, they were railway men. They didn't look terribly different from the railway men who check my tickets these days. They looked like ordinary people.
Ordinary people were policemen involved in remnant victims, secretaries taking the records of genocides, dentists and doctors carrying out selections. All these people were neighbour wielding machetes in Rwanda, school teachers, trained concentration camp guards in Bosnia. Jean Lewis, Muslim Paka, the survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, recalls that when the killing started, to be honest, Everyone was involved. Our neighbour, friends. We didn't know the killing was the extent of what happened.
Rescuers as ordinary people. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things, risking their lives, their livelihoods, their families to help others. Sir Nicholas Winton, a young stockbroker, rescued 669 children from Czechoslovakia, bringing them to the UK, thereby sparing them from the horrors of the Holocaust. He said, "Why are you making such a big deal out of it? I just helped a little. I was in the right place at the right time."
Persecuted people as ordinary people. Victims of genocide were ordinary people. They simply had an aspect of their identity that the perpetrators did not like, and that made them targets for the persecution. Kamal Pervanik, survivor of Bosnia, said, "People may think that they have nothing to do with my story, but what happened to me could happen to them, to people like yourself. It may sound too hard to believe, but this doesn't just happen to strangers who live far away. I'm just an ordinary person. These terrible things can happen to people like us."
I would now like to invite Councillor Wendy Pattison to share a poem entitled Ordinary People.
The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2023 is Ordinary People. This theme considers how ordinary people were involved in all aspects of the Holocaust and subsequent genocide. Ordinary People by Tajmir Riahi. Ordinary people are everywhere. We see them here and there. They go to work every day on foot, by bicycle, bus and train. They have their own memories, sweet and bitter, with joy and pain. Struggles and hardships, successes and failures, regrets and disappointments. These are the ordinary people that make life extraordinary. Thank you.
Rabbi Lipsey will now perform a blessing in Hebrew and English.
So I'm going to read the memorial prayer that we say. It's adapted for different circumstances, and this one's written particularly with the victims of the Shoah, the Holocaust, in mind. I'll read it in English first and then say it in Hebrew. Those that can, if you wish, please be upstanding. Almighty God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, provide a sure rest upon the wings of the divine presence, within the levels of the holy and the pure, whose countenance shines like the sky. The souls of the 6 million Jews who were murdered, slaughtered, burnt, and exterminated for the sanctification of your name by the Nazi assassins and their collaborators. Let the Garden of Eden be their repose. May the Master of Mercy protect them forever in the protective shelter of his wings and bind their souls with the bond of life. The Lord is their heritage, and they shall rest peacefully where they fell. And let us say, Amen. And in the Hebrew, Kel Molerachamim, Shoichein Bamaroimim, Hamatzei Menuchem Lechoin, Al Kamfi Ashchina, Bamalois Kadosh, Umutahoirim Kazoyhar, Horokia Mazhirim, Es Nishmois, Hashishim Ribo Yehudim, Shanehergu, Veshanishchetu, Veshanisrufu, Veshanisrufu Al Kiddush Hashem, Began Eden Temunu Chasam, Lochein Balorachamim Yastireim Visesa Knofov Leilomim, V'yitzroi b'tzroi chaim v'snur shmoiseyem Hashem u'nachalasom v'yonuchu v'shalom al mishkavom v'noimar Amen.
Rick O'Farrell, Interim Chief Executive, will now close the event.
I was particularly pleased to be asked to close today's event because for me it has personal resonance. Remote through the passage of time, admittedly, but resonance all the same. My mother's maiden name is Elul, E-L-L-U-L, a Hebrew name which the rabbi tells me is also a month in your calendar. Both my grandmothers were of the Jewish religion as well. The family home is Malta. My ancestors will have moved there in 1530, along with the Knights Hospitaliers, the Knights of St. John, who most of you will know as the Crusaders. The Crusaders who in the Holy Land made it their mission not just to wipe out people of the Muslim faith, but also to wipe out Hebrews and Jews. Not a lot of people know that. Why my family, why my ancestors managed to survive that, I have no idea. I'm eternally grateful. No doubt they performed some useful function for those crusaders, as did the unfortunate people from Czechoslovakia and Poland when they were forced to work in slave labour camps. So for me, this has personal resonance. I hope you will forgive me for that indulgence to share that story with you. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's event. I'm sure you found the service very thought-provoking. I would in particular give my special thanks to our young people from the Youth Parliament and the Youth Cabinet for hosting the event so well. In particular, I'd like to congratulate Gracie, Rosie, Abby and Daniel for speaking so well to such an audience as this. It must be quite nerve-wracking for you, and you did really well. I find it nerve-wracking. I've done this all my life. It's all too easy for genocides to be forgotten, to be seen as inconvenient truths, something we want to brush to one side. And events such as today's, I feel, are very important as they raise awareness of the horrors of genocide among all of us, but particularly among our young people, and help ensure that messages are carried forward to future generations. Rabbi Lipsey, you once again made our event very special. I'd like to give you our special thanks. I'd like to thank all of those who have organised the event and produced the video of the survivors' experiences, which bring home to us all the horrors faced by many. The theme of this year's service reminds us that genocides are not carried out exclusively by monstrous individuals, although monstrous individuals are usually behind them, of course. Ordinary people are involved in all aspects of the Holocaust, and we've heard that from some of the presentations. All aspects of the Holocaust, the Nazi persecution of other groups, the Soviet pogroms, the genocides taking place in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and, as the leader and the rabbi have mentioned, what is now happening in the Ukraine as well. Ordinary people were perpetrators, they were bystanders, they were rescuers, they were witnesses, and they were victims. And ordinary people are still involved today in everything that is going on. But finally, and I think this is very important, as our young colleagues have reminded us, while ordinary people may have participated in those genocides for whatever reasons, it's also ordinary people like us here today who can be extraordinary in our actions. We can all make decisions to challenge prejudice, to stand up to hatred, to speak out against identity-based persecution. It is enough for us to do all of this, open to us to do all of this, personal decisions that we can make. And if we all do these things, hopefully one day we can bring an end to genocide. Once again, thank you very much for attending today's event.